Welcome to Sunday Civics, the home for the civically engaged. I am your host, your civics teacher and neighborhood political strategist, L. Joy Williams, and I am so glad that you made it to class this morning. I am trying to hold it together. I'm trying to hold my seat for two reasons. Number one, for those of you who have been rocking with me from the beginning, this is our 200th class together. 200. I cannot believe that I have had something to say for 200 episodes. But more importantly, I'm so thankful to the entire team, which we'll talk about at the end, for continuing to support this great labor of love, this calling to be able to teach all that I know, for me to continue to learn and then run back to class and come here and teach you. So, the other reason that I am excited is because 18-year-old L. Joy Williams is like really excited about the guests that I have in conversation at the front of the class to celebrate, because 18-year-old Joy, that's when she first became aware of a professor, Dr. Greg Carr. And it was me getting on, the Greyhound bus and Amtrak, going to DC to the Library of Congress, and then eventually venturing over to different colleges in Philly and DC, and also being in the what were then like very Black centered conversations about education, about reparations, about movement, and just community in general. And that is how I became aware of Dr. Carr. And so, joining me at the front of the class, no stranger to being at the front of the class, is Dr. Greg Carr. Hey there.
Hey, L. Joy, this is a real pleasure. 200 classes. 200 classes. Congratulations, and congratulations on, and Black women, the beauty of Black women is unparalleled in the history of the species. So I don't know how you can be still just about a couple of years older than 18 and have put in a couple of decades in all the spaces you've put in as an organizer and a consultant and helping people beat people behinds in campaigns, and then bringing all that momentum to us. Is a true honor and a blessing to be in your classroom, sis. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. I mean, and I really do this, like listening to you, and those of you who are in narrative, who are Nubia, know this, of those of us sitting in a class. Though when you sit in that type of learning space, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you have a PhD, a master's, or no schooling at all. Like, everybody is at level learning at the same time. And then, as I say here on the show, is important. It's important for you not to keep it, not for you to bottle it up and keep it for yourself, that you're the only person who knows. You got to go run tell that. Like, you have to go and tell someone else, so that they can be empowered and take that information and take action as well. So I love being in class, in communion with you and Karen, and all of the folks, to continue to learn. And it sucks that I'm traveling at this time, because I had envisioned us having this conversation. You are always in front of your books, and I was going to be in front of mine, because anytime that you're in the conversation and you bring out a book or say a book or something, I'm like, I got that one. And so I wanted to be able to pull
Hey, look,
do show and tell, if you will, and be like, I got this one.
Yeah, no, that's right. Promise me that we will do this again, because I remember when you told the world that you were in the process of reassembling your library after y'all moved and you got everything together. I was excited as everybody else. So, in fact, now that you said that, I'm thinking, yeah, but of course, you out there in the world fighting for us. So just promise me at some point we're going to get back together so we can do exactly that. That's what I'm looking forward to. Yes.
Absolutely. So it is your first time in front of this classroom. So we're going to begin where I ask every guest for their first time to begin, by you telling us the story of your first civic action.
Okay. And first of all, let me thank you. I want to add my voice to one of our elders that you interviewed a while back, our brother Ron Daniels, who thanked you for reinvigorating the study of civics. I have to thank you for that because I'm old enough to have taken civics at Hillsborough High School in Nashville, Tennessee, back in the day. And we know that that's not the case, but we also know that because of these platforms, and Karen has developed this in-class platform that led to Narrative in Nubia. And I think we're in the mid 150s now, which means that 10 years from now, we'll still be following right in the wake of L. Joy Williams' Sunday Civics. We're still going to be a few episodes behind. And then in tandem, these are the classrooms that are going to educate our people going forward and the world. So with that in mind, I guess three things come to mind. The first two real quick. My first civic action, and I think about all the classes you've conducted in this space on voting. And while, as you say, it's not the only thing, it is it's an important tool. My first civic action, I can't claim credit for that. In the South, and I know you got some Southern people in your family. In the South, you accompany your parents to the voting booth. So I remember as a child, just old enough to walk, maybe 4 or 5 years old, so a little bit older than baby age, walking into the voting booth with my mother and my father as they went in to vote. And it was a big deal. And for them, of course, they remember the time when that was a little bit harder than it is for us. The second one comes to mind is wearing a ribbon during the time of the Atlanta child murders. It was my civics professor at Hillsborough High School, Jeannie Scott, one of the Black teachers at Hillsborough, who had us all wearing ribbons. And I remember one of my white classmates asking another white classmate, why are they wearing ribbons? And one of the Black young ladies said, she cares about her children, because that's when they were killing Black children in Atlanta. And we wore those ribbons. But the one that comes most immediately to mind to me in terms of college is when we marched, because Tennessee State is a historically Black school, and we were protesting because they were trying to pump more white students into the university instead of more resources. And we marched on the governor's office, and we actually got involved in the middle of a gubernatorial election. And talking to you, a person who has worked on several campaigns, consulting on others, I think about Carl McCall, certainly Stacey Abrams. I got questions for you. We got to get you in another space for that. But at any rate, we took on the governor of Tennessee. And so it's so important, the lessons that you're teaching us here, to remind us that it's not enough to live in a society. You got to get involved. And so those examples are the ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah. I've said this over and over again. There are many reasons that I started Sunday Civics. And one of the where it was birthed, sort of the idea that was birthed, is working in politics, working for electeds, working for political institutions. I would always do the meeting before the meeting, particularly when it came to our people.
Yes.
Right. So I would be working for the speaker, for the city council, or working for the controller, working for an instant, and there would be a meeting coming up. I would have to prep the candidate or prep the elected official for the meeting. This is what they're asking for. This is, the issues surrounding it. This is what the status is. But then I would also do the meeting before the meeting for the people. And I'd be like, okay, when you get in this meeting, this is what he has the power to do. This is what he gonna say to you. This is how you're gonna do it, right? Like preparing people, right? Both doing my job, preparing the candidate, preparing the elected official, but then also preparing the community. And those were mini civics lessons, right? Because I would have to say, they were like, we want this and that. And I'm like, okay, well, he can't do that because he's the mayor, or he's, this or whatever.
Yes.
That is, that's what we need to ask Schumer for on a federal level. But here's what he can do, right? Here's the ask that you can go from there. And so being able to and so I found myself doing that so often. I was like, I gotta be able find a way to sort of communicate this more regularly.
Yes.
And I tell the story on the show all the time about I'm sitting in the back of a community meeting, and something as small and local as opposite side of the street parking, where I had the information and knew, oh, well, if you reduce your cleanliness score, you can reduce the amount of times that, it's you have to move your car, right? I'm being the smug kid about it. Meanwhile, they didn't know that. Right? Like, it's not something that's broadcast and known. And I was like, okay, it was those kind of exercises that was like, how can I sort of be able to share that information in a better way.
Yes.
And, I think when people talk about civics, they talk about it being in schools for young people.
Yes.
But what about grown folks
No question. No
who
question.
don't know how?
No question.
And then that's what led me to research how have we done it in our community. And that's when I found Septima Clark and the citizenship schools and sort of all that kind of piece.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so it's like, yes, there is a way to teach and engage this. There's a way to do this that's practical, that engages people. And that civics is not you going to pick up trash in your neighborhood at the park or whatever,
Right.
because people are resulting civics into like volunteerism solely,
That's right.
rather than what it is, which is exercising your power and
That's
participating in your own governance.
that's right.
So I wanted to ask you your take on that. And particularly, I think it's by design to structure civics as a like you being a good citizen, good volunteer, and not you being able to exercise your power.
Yes. I think, just the example that you remind us of consistently, that you've just given, that's really where, as we know, the heart of the work lies. It isn't in the schools, K-12, university, any formal structural schooling situation, because we know schools exist to socialize. It's not just about content, it's about behavior. And we know that curriculum wars are what they are, not only in the United States, but around the world, because you have folk who have a vested interest in having people behave in a certain way for their benefit. So when the way you approach civics, it seems to me, gets at the heart of the enterprise of the civitas, as they might say in Latin, or the polity or the polis in Greek. And I'm using those examples very specifically for a reason I'll say in a moment, because both those concepts come to the question of community and how you structure community. So for the Romans, they had a hierarchy. If you weren't Roman, they considered you heathen. If you were Greek, they had a hierarchy. If you weren't Greek, they considered you non-Greek or not elas or a heathen. And even within those societies, they had hierarchy: who had money, who didn't, who was a male, who wasn't, who was enslaved, who wasn't. And so those hierarchies speak to the heart of what we call politics, political science, or even civics. Well, that's the problem, because at the heart of human society is how we live together as community. And the way you approach civics, L. Joy, really dismantles the way we are socialized in formal education to think about civics. No, civics is really about power. And of course, power lies with the people. Elected officials are employees. We can turn them out anytime we want. And as you remind us all the time, while we're out there organizing to vote, we should be organizing the community for power. And the example you give is a great example of that, because it's one thing for a kid like me at 16, 17 years old to be in school and learn something about maybe, alternative side of the street parking, which wasn't a thing in Nashville, but it's huge in Philly and DC and New York, places like that. It's quite another for someone to learn something either on Sirius or through the Apple Podcast, which is where I listen to you a lot, and they realize, what? Wait, there's a score, there's an index. Wait, we can do. You probably saved somebody's life, quite frankly, El Joy. Because think about the regular folk, the people in the community who can use that practical information to wield their power. And powerless people are often powerless because nobody gave them information. What you're doing for us, this is the kind of classroom that really moves societies. It's not the K-12 classrooms. It's not the college classrooms, although they're important. It's the classroom of the community. And that's what you're reaching with this platform.
Yeah. And I do like that you talk about all the time on Nubia about disrupting the school model right now. And I long ago, I remember like I went to Hofstra, right? So I was one of the first classes where when they started their Africana Studies program. And so it was all new, like in terms of, but there were professors there. I don't know if you know Professor Maria, sort of others who were, in that space of like creating, this is what you need to study. This is what, and I remember discovering, wait, there are people that gained knowledge that became masters in their craft, whether it was a craft with their hands or technical or even intellectual, that weren't didn't have the ceremony of crossing a stage or receiving a hood. Like they gained that knowledge through continuous study. And for me, that was empowering because I didn't have the money. And so like while Hofstra can tell you, oh yeah, she attended and like completed all of the credits to graduate, but she owed us $85,000. So she won't be getting that certificate on the wall. Like, but what you can't take away, right, is what I learned. My, engagement, what I contributed to the, the student body and sort of all of that kind of stuff. And so learning that, about those places where study was life study, where there was no finish, there was no degree, that it was a continued, practice, and, that's what you do. I think that itself is empowering, particularly to communities where we've gatekept education, right? And said, unless you have money, you can't access it. Well, that's different. A different empowering tool to a young person who's like, well, I'll never get there because me or my family don't have money. But to say to them, giving and empowering you with the tool to read, the tool to reason, the tool to understand, forget the paper, forget somebody deeming you as completed, right? You can now become a lifelong student, whether that's in a trade, in a craft, or through your mind, right? And that itself is empowering, particularly when we've put so many things behind a paid firewall.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, we're humans, so we're going to be learning. We were learning from the moment we were conceived in one way or the other, and we come out of our mother's wombs, and from that moment, we're out in the world learning. And until we take our last breath and go into whatever comes next, we are learning in this form and in this place. And when the way you describe your experience at Hofstra, for me at Tennessee State, roughly speaking, almost a generation before, it was a lot more affordable, but it was no less daunting for a person like me, who was the first in my family to go to college. And that's no great accomplishment. It's just a recognition of the structural inequalities of this society, as we know. It's for me to navigate that space and really not have anybody I could turn to for advice on, how to move through the space, and, we're working and doing this kind of thing, it becomes a real challenge. And we fast forward to 2022 and, or whenever in the 21st century, and we see now young people are faced with this staggering choices. I mean, do you go to school and go into deep debt where you pay for the rest of your life, or do you postpone your dreams to go do something else? Well, at the end of the day, this model is unsustainable. That's really where I'm going with it. And by disrupting it, by really understanding that human beings are constantly learning, what we are doing is bypassing all that unnecessary hierarchy, even as we work like hell. And one of the beautiful things I love about Sunday Civics is that you're constantly telling people, sharing with people, communing with people who have these skills and experiences to illustrate for folk and to demonstrate and to model how we get power across the range. So while we fight to get affordability in college passed as legislation, and we get more money for student loans or grants, at the same time, we're doing this. If you're alive and can breathe, you're learning. And so and one thing that's never going to be displaced is radio, or if in this generation, podcast. It's coming in the ear. So all people have to do is sit and listen and then think. This, I think, is the most effective form of communication, mass communication we have. And I think Sunday Civics models for us practical steps on how we empower ourselves. And to me, that's the most invaluable form of learning. It really is, because it just flattens all those artificial hierarchies and distinctions.
And it makes, in saying, not that you want anyone and everyone to have a platform, because some people got podcasts and you like, sir,
facts,
ma'am, and theys.
No question. Yes.
Sir, ma'am, and theys. Like, no.
Right.
But that's the thing of community, right? You again can't gatekeep and control. It was just like, I would rather you not have a microphone. However, they sell them, so like nothing I can do about it.
That's true. I must say though, I mean, I think authenticity plays a role. because
Yes.
I will not say that I am a person who does not do the occasional pass by Drink Champs or some of these other platforms. But I think one of the beautiful things too is a question of authenticity. I mean, for organizers, for somebody like you who, you can't walk the streets of Brooklyn without getting stopped every 5 steps. As Ras Baraka's daddy and mama told him, it's one thing for them to stop us and say, stop Amiri and Amina Baraka in Newark and say, we're glad what you're doing. It's quite another thing for you because they come in and you ask for a job. So,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, what I'm saying? But the reason people can stop you and the reason people connect with you is not only the authenticity, it's the fact that you have worked for them. And I think that is the distinction between everybody have a microphone, sure. But when some people speak, people listen differently. And I think in this whole noise of all of this stuff that's out here now, I think it's the people who have worked for the people and who have that kind of momentum that emerge out of all that noise. And this is one of those spaces. And it's precisely because you're not in the ivory tower away from everybody. You're not in the halls of government away from everybody. You can walk all those halls and walk down the street too. And I think that's what brings together the audiences, all those other people. And those other audiences we've got a lot of friends like this. We both know who are academics who claim they're working for the people, but you never see those Negroes in the street.
Listen, I tell people I have a different accountability model
No question.
because, me being president of an NAACP branch, that's a different level. Even within even within NAACP, there are people that abuse and use and things like that. I always don't understand it because I'm like, listen, my older folks, they will come gather me. I remember I had like a health challenge or something. I came to a meeting and they were like, why are you out here?
Wow.
Why? No, and the same thing, if you're doing too much, and these are like we say, regular Black folks,
No
right?
question.
So like if there was an instance, is happening in Brooklyn, there's, political power struggles happening. And, some younger white folks thought they was coming this way to challenge something or whatever. My regular Black folks, and then I had the brothers, like the Black Vets for Social Justice was like, oh, do we need to come to the meeting?
Word.
Like,
you better fit that accent. No question.
And we're like, do we need to come to the meeting? And I was like, okay, don't turn up. Like, they don't know, they kids. And they were like, oh, but they need to know. Right. Right. But there's a different level of accountability. So I can't go too far. I can't say something different from what is actual engagement. And being a church kid, right? I liken this to, there's different types of churches. There are churches where the church has hired you, which is a different level of accountability versus when you founded the church and the accountability, right? Because if you founded the church is surrounded by you and your ego and your, you as founder, right? And so everything, so you can get away with a little bit more than you could if you were actually hired by the people. Because the church exists, the people exist, whether you are the preacher or not, whether you are the pastor or not. That's different than I'm gonna leave this accountability structure and go start my own because I don't want to be accountable here. Same thing happens in social justice space, right? If you create an entity, you create an organization and build it around the cult of your personality, sometimes that's good. But if you don't have that accountability structure, that if I decide to get high and mighty, I got some regular Black people back in Brooklyn. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, we having a meeting at 3. You should show up."
You should show up.
Like we having a meeting.
You are the agenda. I look of all the branches, and you know better than I do in terms of the long history of the NAACP. If the tensions between the national office and the locals, I think about Roy Wilkins, who wasn't really speaking to Medgar Evers, and then Evers gets assassinated. And because some of the long time in NAACPers, as they used to call them in the South, that's that tension. And then when you layer on that on top of the fact that you are representing Brooklyn, and as these young folks who are coming in now, considering themselves residents of Brooklyn, there's a reason why those of us around the country follow behind you when you say the People's Republic of Brooklyn. This is a very different concept you're dealing with. But you are president of I don't even think it's an argument. It's not an argument made. that is the Pan-African branch of the NAACP. In other words, you know, people in Brooklyn come from all over the African world, and they bring all the swag and the smoke from every corner of the African world. So if they come for you, you're gonna be gathered. That's just the bottom line. So
in both the physical and the spiritual, and whatever religion, whatever your God is, there is some people in Brooklyn,
yes,
who can speak to that God.
From Gardner Taylor and Y.T. Walker in the old school big Baptist churches to Santeria and Vodun and any kind of Ifa house you want.
But like whatever you desire, it exists, and it exists in Brooklyn, and we're celebrating this year our centennial for Brooklyn NAACP.
Wow.
And like one of my greatest things to do is, you know, all of the NAACP archives are at the Library of Congress. Mm-hmm. And so I always, you know, do this teaching for my branch in February, because I have a big pet peeve about February that everybody always bring out. I was like, you know, poor Shirley Chisholm and, you know, Malcolm X and them, they can't get no rest. Because they're February.
I heard that episode. It was brilliant, Eljo. It was brilliant when you dealt with the local history. It was brilliant. So yeah, you said, please give these people a rest.
You got ancestors too. Why don't you call lady, like borrow from the Mexican and from the the Latin, and like to call your people.
Seriously. I mean, you know what? You should put that on a t-shirt, because that should be the Black History Month. Call your people. No, because you made that point in that class, and it was brilliant. Our history begins with our family and local history. I love what y'all do, for example, at Weeksville. You saw you at the Weeksville. I mean, you know, that our history starts in the mirror. I love what you said. You should make it. That should be it. Yeah. Get your people.
But like being able to, in February, you know, I say let's do Black Brooklyn history, right, and tell the story, because there are people, you know, there are lots of people in Brooklyn that said, you know, I come originally from the South. I come originally from the Caribbean. But there are some Black people who's just like, I come from here.
No question.
Right, because that is where they're connected. There is no go back to, because yes, I can go back generations, but my generations go back here, like in Brooklyn, in terms of where it's at. And being able to, you know, we just recorded some of the video where we're talking about the Black Brooklyn history as it pertains to the branch. And there's the letter from the, you know, at the time, the white secretary at NAACP, you know, it was like, the colored people of Brooklyn wish to organize a branch. That was like 19, you know, right?
Yeah.
And particularly where the members of Brooklyn NAACP sat, that it was them raising money for Scottsboro campaigns. Right. It was them raising money to send back down south for, you know, we think of the battleground happening in the South, where people were coming up not just to Harlem, but to Brooklyn, because that's where you had, you know, dentists and doctors and teachers and right, all in Brooklyn, that was like, okay, we're gonna get our little dollars together.
That's right.
But at the same time, challenging institutions in the city of New York. Oh, right. No you know, and so to read letters back and forth between the president of the Brooklyn NAACP and insurance companies at the time, like, why you got separate windows for Black people? You know, like, I mean, for fighting things like that in terms of education. You know, I did a campaign when in New York, we did this campaign a couple of years ago calling for an independent prosecutor for police cases. Yes. Well, I go back in the history when there's a big gubernatorial campaign leading into a presidential campaign. NAACP had an entire year, Brooklyn had an entire year and a half campaign about creating an independent prosecutor role for that. So it was like, anything I can dream up of. Wow. Here's Brooklyn NAACP that was already, you know, asking for that and getting in trouble. There's a letter from National to Brooklyn NAACP. We are not a criminal justice organization.
See, you can't do that. You can't do that in Brooklyn. I mean, like you said, I think for a time between Harlem and Brooklyn, Du Bois lived in Brooklyn, didn't he?
Yep.
I mean, you can't tell Brooklyn NAACP they not give. In some way, that's a bellwether for the country. No, but That's what we expect.
Yep. But
Wow.
I do have this question for you, just to get back to civics really quickly and this
We haven't
connection
left
of
it.
it.
This is the beautiful thing. But go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Um, so I wanted to ask you about civics in the governance structure,
Mm,
because a lot of our civic actions, our engagement piece is about fighting forces outside,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Is about fighting what is being done to us on behalf of us without our consent, what we are trying to amass power, doing all of that, right?
Mhm.
I am have been over the summer. I was writing my new speech, my new workshop piece or whatever, and the title is "All My Elected Officials Are Black, but I Still Ain't Free."
Ooh. Ooh.
So one, I'm going to get a lot of calls once this is delivered, but
Yeah.
two,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
two, what, being able to empower people who are like, okay, it's what happens when the person we are fighting, when the structure, when the institution we are fighting comes from us.
Mhm.
And then what is civic participation in that space, right?
Mhm.
Because there's one thing that they are occupying an institution. This is something you say all the time about, right? Barack Obama was occupying an institution of presidency.
Yes.
Eric Adams is occupying the institution of New York City mayor,
Yes.
right? But
Yes.
then there is still supposed to be, you still have an umbilical cord connected.
Yes.
And community should be able to pull that and be like, hey,
True.
hey,
True. For sure. For sure.
let's pull you. So what is, and how do you operate, or your opinion on how, I have my own
Mhm.
opinion, but how do you operate in that space? Because people teeter on the thing, I don't want to embarrass,
Yeah.
but I also need, like,
Yeah.
we still need to eat, we still need housing, we
No
still
question.
need, there's still the issues that need to be moved forward.
No question. No, I think remember something that Linda Sarsour said one time, and she was like, we misconstrue what politicians are. Sometimes we need our best opponents in office. It isn't that we have a choice between somebody who really represents what we want, is going to fight hard for that, and somebody who doesn't. Sometimes the difference is close to indistinguishable, but there is a difference in an election, and we live in a society that is driven, at least politically, in terms of elected office, by elections. And so sometimes you had to vote for and try to put in power your best opponent, the person you can use the most effectively. And I think about that. I lived in Philly, as you say, you back and forth up and down the East Coast between DC, Philly, New York. I lived in Philly for 17 years. And I remember one time the city of Philadelphia was trying to put a baseball stadium in Chinatown. They're going to build a brand new stadium for the Philadelphia Phillies. And they wanted it downtown because that's the thing these days, right? And of course, old school Brooklynites. I remember going around where Ebbets Field used to be, right? And thinking about how the Dodgers almost had the first dome stadium in the history of sports. But when the city wouldn't come together and do it with the state, that's when Mr. O'Malley and them moved the Dodgers out to the West Coast and told Horace Storm with the New York Giants, come on with us. And that's how I ended up in San Francisco and Brooklyn. But in Philly, that stadium didn't get built. And I remember that summer because we were doing our Philadelphia Freedom Schools. We had about 200 high school students from around the city, mostly of African descent, either like you say, native Philadelphians, Afro-Caribbean, mostly Dominican, Puerto Rican kids, but also Asian students, Laotians, Chinese. And in the conversation, the Chinese students were really coming out of their community saying, we don't want this baseball stadium. And everybody came behind them and came together and said, okay, no baseball stadium in Chinatown. That was our social justice behavior for action for the summer. But this is where I'm going with it. At one point, we met with some leaders in Chinatown, the elders of Chinatown. And, in talking to them, I'm sitting there with these elders, and one of the elders said to me, do you see any Chinese people on Philadelphia City Council? I said, no, sir. He said, do you know why that's not our top priority? I said, no, why? He said, why would you necessarily have to have somebody on the council that looks like you when you can own the politicians who are on the council? And in that moment, the bell went off in my head. I think Black people have been caught up in the politics of representation because we work so hard to have somebody who looks like us sitting in power. But demographics and representation in terms of just somebody who looks like you is really missing the point now. Because as you know better than I do, having worked at every valence of government, inside and out, you know, of course, that government is about distributing resources, getting resources and distributing resources. Again, power. And when these tax bases began to evaporate with white flight and then deindustrialization just knocks the bottom out of the job market for people. And the past 50 years, we've been struggling, many of us, to hold on by our fingernails. Elected officials are increasingly trapped between finance capital and certainly New York, the white hot market of the United States and one of the white hot markets of the world. Developers and everybody else is pushing. Well, the only way you can push back on that is to have people organized in enough at a critical mass to put elected officials in who were going back to Linda, can make your most effective opponent to fight back against these forces, because the forces are mostly, you know, you're talking about money at this point. So it all comes down to this. While we are trying to get better candidates and recruit candidates and put people in who represent our interests, we never stop, and you make this point in class after class after class, we never stop organizing, because that's the one thing that can halt gentrification or stop it, even reverse it. If you get enough people organized and enough people working out there, you can fight back. And so finally, I'll just say this. For that cord you mentioned, that umbilical cord, whether it be David Dinkins or Eric Adams in New York, whether it be Wilson Goode in Philadelphia, whether it be, you name it, whether it be Kenneth Gibson in Newark, for example, in 1967, the first Black mayor elected in a major East Coast city. Well, yes, you're one of ours, but because you are one of ours, if you claim to be one of ours, you must now represent us. And if you don't, we're going to take it personal. A little bit more personal than if it was LaGuardia or John Lindsay. A little bit more personal than if it was Ed Rendell. No, a little bit more personal. And the best representatives, like a Marion Barry, for example, in D.C., who, regardless of his personal challenges, will be forever in this city the mayor for life. The best people say, I'm here because you put me here. And because you put me here, I will never do anything that is not in your best interest. And if I'm forced to make a devil's choice, I'm going to tell y'all about it before I go in that room. And that's, I think, Eljoy, that's where we see, you know, well, I should say one other thing. Another problem we have is Black people, just because we have money, let's say Eljoy Williams and Greg Carr get put on by the government. That when Marion Barry comes in and tells people that 20% of this bond work here in the city got to be done by Black underwriters, and then you and me get paid because we're underwriters, and then we get our money and move into PG County. Or when they build the Atlanta airport, Maynard Jackson says 30% of these people build this airport got to be Black, and creates all these Black millionaires who then move out of Atlanta, Fulton County. Well, then that's a betrayal too. We mistake Black success with individual Blacks getting rich. That's a betrayal too. And I think that's what our generation, you know, my generation, your generation, we have to begin now to stop equating how we look with power. And that's going to be it's going to be hard work, but without that work, we'll create a bunch of Black millionaires and most of our people be poor.
Yeah. You know, and it's also about that, a lot of things. So one, about that personal, you know, as I mentioned, I come from a family who believes in that. Like you don't just preach this, you gotta live this.
That's right.
Right. And so when we bought our house, like one of the things, my husband's from Jersey, boo, tomatoes. And he would say all the time, like, you know, he's a public school teacher. So every now and then I come up with new schemes, and he's like, you do remember you married a public school teacher and not like not a Wall Street thing or whatever. I was like, oh, we can do it. We can make it happen. Like, whatever. So when we were buying the house, he was like, all that you want in a house, I can get you if we go to Jersey.
Wow.
You know, and go whatever. And I was like, I do not want to go to Jersey. First, tomatoes. Two, I was like, two, and he was like, okay, well, let's, you know, looking at different places, and, you know, in New York, he was like, well, can we go outside of the city? I was like, no, boo, tomatoes. And then I was like, I'm gonna stay in Brooklyn. And I was like, I need to stay with Black people.
No question.
And he was like, You and the black. So he teases me about it all the time, because my husband is Black and Puerto Rican. So he teases me about it all the time. You got to be with, you got to be with the Black people. And here we are, and it's 2:00 in the morning, and they still outside. Like with the thing.
There go your
I was
people.
like, right,
Go
that's
get
your people you wanted to live with. And it's 2 in the morning.
He got a lot of nerve coming from
Right.
Puerto Rico, making noise about people making noise. Come on.
And we got this foster baby here that can't go to sleep because you want to live with your people. Anyway.
Look, 50 years from now, when she's bringing her grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, she is going to be bragging about the fact she's a Brooklyn girl.
Right, exactly. But like those kind of conscious decisions, right, take dedication.
Absolutely.
Take commitment, which is all of the pieces that even me talking to elders, whether they are from the South or from the North or even from different islands or the continent, they talk about that different level of commitment, of dedication, right? Of that you have to embody, who you say you are, who you present to both family, who you present to your community, and also what you present to the world. And that of let's move together, right? Like let's, we bought in East New York. People are like, ooh, you in like you in East New York where they shooting every day? I'm like, yeah, but they don't shoot. Like literally, we sometimes leave our car door open. Ain't nobody do it to us because I speak to everybody on my block. Everybody
How about that?
Like now that's not to say something couldn't happen, but at least like the engagement. I was like, when I lived in Bed-Stuy, when the brothers was on the corner doing everything, I leave to go to Georgia at like 2 in the morning or something like that. They were like, yo, shorty, why you leaving at like 3 o'clock in the morning like that?
We got
like, next time let us know.
No,
we'll call, like we'll get the cab for you, like, you know what I mean? So like it's become even in your space. And we have to remember, because we've been taught that making it is getting out, and not that we can pool our resources together.
That's right.
I find myself often doing that, just even in the civic and political space. People talk about schools, like they want to get their kid out of, the local school because the school down in Park Slope or this or whatever. I was like, that school down in Park Slope is a regular public school. You know why they got all that extra money to do stuff? Because they just fundraise for it.
That's right.
The school district didn't want to pay for a violinist. Fine. We'll hire we'll raise money and hire our own.
No
right.
question.
Like we can do the same things and not only bring up our children, right, for the personal, but then also the larger community benefits, right? And being able to find people, that are able to do that. But then also, as you mentioned, for those who are elected, reminding them, right? Like you are a tool in my civic toolbox.
That's right. That's right.
Right? Like you're not a rock star. No. You're not a celebrity. No. You're a tool. I mean, and even people that we put up in that way, Stacey believes the same thing. Tish believes the same thing. The ones that we put up and say like these, rock star and people, whatever. Like if you talk to Tish be like, I occupy this space to do this work at this time. Might change or something to do different, but I am a tool to tell me what I ought to be doing. Show me like how can, and that happens a lot because sometimes we send people based upon ego, based upon them being the right package, but they're not prepared to be in the space. I can't tell you the plenty of times where I've had to tell council members, they're like, I don't think we can do that. Yes, you can. What do you mean you can't do that?
Well, that's another thing.
Who told you couldn't do that?
That's right. That's right. That's another thing I appreciate, and I think we all do about your work here, as a microcosm of your work in general, is that you bring people into this space so people can see what that looks like. And that is incredibly important because there are connections that I wouldn't make except that you bring a range of voices to the microphone. I mean, in the question of education, for example, as you're talking, it makes me reflect on the fact that, I am in some ways a grandchild of Brooklyn, but through the East. I mean, the cultural space, you talk about people raising money and putting their pooling their resources, even the connection to like a Georgia and South Carolina and Brooklyn, buying farmland, bringing it back, starting supermarkets and shops right there in Brooklyn to resource self-determination. And we know, of course, one of the central figures in the East, that cultural center, that school, or Watoto Shule, that work in the 70s and 80s. At the center of that was Les Campbell. Well, he was called Les Campbell when he was working for Ocean Hill Brownsville School District, when they took over, community control of the schools, Black and Puerto Ricans together, families for everybody. He changed his name to Jitu Wayusi, of course, as you know, as folks in Brooklyn know about Jitu. And I knew him well. I mean, that influenced not just Brooklyn, not just New York, that influenced the country and touched beyond the United States. But it was people who are organizing for themselves. And as you talk about, the folks that you not only work with, work alongside, empower, and then bring into this space, what does it look like to be a community servant? Yeah, I mean, that's, talk about a civic toolbox. The vote is in there and the politicians we elect are in there. And what is in there as well is the profile. What does it look like to prepare your community to take power, to maintain power, and to use politics as the effective wielding of power to get resources? So, I mean, again, I thank you again, because people need to see what that looks like. Kevin Parker is a state senator now. I remember when he was just out of school, we was all in school together, and him and them boys out Penn State. Larry know that story better than I do, because she was out there raising sand with him. I mean, Kevin Parker ain't nobody to be intimidated by or scared of. It's a Brooklyn dude. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, every now, Kevin and I are friends, and so every now and then people will be like, "Oh, do you think you can get like Senator Parker?" I'm like, "Who, Kevin?"
Exactly.
Me and my girl, like, sometimes I have to remind myself that not everybody has that same, kind of thing, or whatever. Like, do you think you can help us? And I'm like, and Kevin will be the first to tell you, because he's an example. He took a vote on something on the state level, him being in the state legislature, that I was hot about. And of course, I've informed my membership and so on, whatever, but it was the entire caucus. And it was except for, I don't know if you remember Senator Velmanette Montgomery.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love Velmanette. She has to be on the show as well. And because she read it. And she, I remember her flush. She was like, I don't think my colleagues read this, because it was the budget, it's the budget bill. Nobody reads it. It's just like everything, whatever. So they voted on something. And I was like, we send you there to read. I don't understand. But he's a member of mine. Of Brooklyn Industries. So I invited all of them to come to the next meeting. I was like, explain.
Ooh.
So he was the only one to come.
He did
come. And of course I lit him up.
No question. In love. No question.
Right. But of course, to be able to come, that accountability is part, but you have to be in community to be held accountable, right? Yeah. To be able to come and be like, our bad. It was last day of session. I don't know if not that it's no excuse, but here's, the thing, remember people learning that. And it's just like, oh, wait, I can actually challenge people in terms of the votes they took or didn't take, those kinds of things. Well, some people may think are embarrassing or things like that. They're actually empowering when people know it. It's like, okay, but he came and he stood before us and took accountability for it.
Yes. And
right. And then talked about, here's the next steps what we can do to address it.
Yes. Well, all I was going to say is, as he's doing that, if you're a young person in that space, I know you do a lot of work intergenerationally, you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, especially as he's talking, and then you'll illustrate as you teach, sometimes it's not the person taking the vote, it's their staff that failed them. They carry, and somebody says, oh, there's a job called staffer. Yeah, let me hook you up with an internship, or let me put you in Albany. And the next thing you know, it may take 5-10 years from now. That doesn't happen again, because this child said in the NAA meeting and was like, oh, I want to be a staffer. That will never happen to my member. I mean, but that is the genius of community. I mean, and it only happens when we have people like you who will say, I am not only unafraid to bring these people in, I have relationships with them, and I have relationships with community. Those are to me, that's really, of course, that's how you build power. Power is built over a long frame. It's not just an instant thing.
And listen, I can see the immediate effects with that. With my youngest one, who who learned Robert's rules, and she would call people out in the meeting and tell them they were out of order. Um,
I
and
love it. I
now
love it.
she's 7, and I think I told this story. I don't know if you heard the story before, but during the pandemic, with all the Zoom meetings and whatever, we're still advocating, be it on Zoom.
Yes.
I'm on a Zoom with Chuck Schumer, and other NAACP leaders about the John Lewis federal bill.
Yes.
She comes in asking for something, and I'm like, I'm on the thing with, Senator Schumer sees her, addresses her and was just like, hi, what's your name? He's like, I'm your senator. And she's like, no, you're not. Ooh. She's like, Uncle Kevin is my senator. And I'm like, so first of all, we don't live in Kevin's district, I keep telling you. Right. I was like, you can't just pick and choose. I was like, anyway, he's on the state level. Chuck Schumer is your federal senator. Yeah. And she was like, well, what does that mean? And he was like, well, I represent you in the Senate. And she was like, how you represent me? You don't know what I like.
Wow. You know what? No, seriously. See, that's how the Kennedy children were raised. I mean, this is how, in other words, the world is mine. You need to tell me what you're doing for me. See, that's, I love it. I love it. See,
right? So like that, and then, a lot of people will think of, she's not outwardly disrespectful, but people think like how she challenges authority. People think like, oh, like trying to, and I was like, she recognizes that you're in a, older, that you're in an authority position. She's not being, but she doesn't believe that she's automatically beneath you.
No. Well, look where she lives. Look who she lives with.
Right. So
you.
Right. So she's just like, how you know? And so he asked her, he was like, what do you care about? She was like, LOL dolls. So she had the, her personal thing, but she also said, and can we have more fruit at school? Like all those kinds of things. Right. So like being able to model that behavior and bring young people in is one of the greatest things I love about even NAACP, right? Like that we bring young people be able to lead their own spaces. It's one of the only, social justice organizations that require by our Constitution, young people sit at the table equally.
Absolutely.
Like not sort of underneath us in that space. That allows for that. And so being able to model or to be able for your children to learn lessons that you did not learn in terms of that civic space, to be able to engage in political discourse, to engage in civics, not just to go volunteer and read to the poor or pick up trash like on the side of the highway, but no, here's how you will power, right? And, I tell people all the time, the people who are most powerful speak to who represent them all the time.
Oh, no question. No question. And those people listen because they know when you listen to this person, you're listening to who has been, they represent people who chose them to say, when you hear her, you're hearing us. And we see that. I mean, whatever Joe Biden is or isn't, like I said, like you were saying, in terms of Black elected officials, sometimes we get caught up in personalities, how people look. There's a reason why he says we're going to pardon all these folks who are in federal custody or have been in federal custody for marijuana simple possession, and we want the governors to do the same. You get pushed to that. I mean, in fact, the last time I think that we saw each other, you were getting on a plane in Columbia, South Carolina. I was coming out of something. Y'all have been down there working hard for a candidate who ended up being vice president, of course, Kamala Harris. I'm saying that's the battle, though. You're in the trenches. So Biden just do that because he wakes up one morning and says, I think it's a good idea.
I'm going to do something for the Blacks.
That's years of banging on this cat. You put your best opponent in the elective office and then you bang on them. That's what you do. I mean, so yeah, it's very powerful to hear you talk about that. And the NAACP, of course, is one of the, it's so funny how people come into a movement. And that's another reason why this is such an important classroom, because you're educating people about the history too. He was all the NAACP is tired, it's dead, it's a legacy organization. No, understand the youth division of NAACP. That was a hard battle. And when that was ensconced in that, Black Lives Matter, you can talk about every iteration since. But understand, Rosa Parks was the secretary of the youth division of the Montgomery NAACP, even at 42 years old. It was young people. I mean, there's a reason why they asked what became SNCC. They said they asked those young people, will you become the youth division? Will you join the youth division? No, we're going to stay separate. But we got respect for y'all. Why? Because the youth drove that. I mean,
and they came, and some of them came out of that, right?
they
Like
sure did.
learning, about some of the people that they hold up, right? Came
Fred
out
Hampton.
of, I was going to say, Fred Hampton and others. I had to remind a younger cousin of mine. He was like, I'm not down with NAACP stuff. I'm more like Fred Hampton. And I was like, so who trained Fred Hampton?
Ooh, ooh, ooh. No, you didn't. Wait, say
And
that.
I was like, and look, I am no stranger. Like before, I'm loved now in the association. I was not in the beginning. Right? Like,
Well, that's how
it
you know
was
the credibility is there
right, because it was always what that gal GAL
too. Like,
in Brooklyn.
with that gal in Brooklyn to A. But that's how you get respect, though. Like you said, you know, there are people who pick up a phone call and a politician answers. It's because of power. It isn't just I like them and they don't like me. No, if I ignore this call, then everybody's gonna be coming next, and I don't want that on my back. That's just that's power.
Well, that's how we got. We weren't able to get John Lewis voting rights on the federal level done, but I tell you what, we did get done: the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York.
No question. No question. People
Which
say
wasn't which wasn't people's priority. I mean, I can tell you now, the staffer of leadership, it's the last 3 weeks of session, and they were like, "This is not on our agenda to get passed." And I was like, "Well, why not?" I was like, "Never mind. Don't answer that.
Never mind.
I'll just make it a part of your agenda."
No question. No question.
And I was like, "Okay, branches, here's y'all script. Here's y'all thing, whatever."
You say, oh,
And
Joe,
it's similar
when I
to
need to, but
right, like it's similar to that. And I say, people contact me about, say I'm being menacing on Twitter when I say this. I'm from the make him do it generation. I say the same thing for Biden. It's just like I can't, my political party is not who I am.
No question.
It is the political tool that I use in order to get the power. Because people confuse that.
Can I ask you, why is that so hard for people, particularly our people, to understand that you're not a shield for the Democratic Party? I mean, why is that so hard to understand?
Well, I think because people tie, right? Just look at the arguments that happen, whether it's about the Democrats, the Republicans, Planned Parenthood, others. We got to get to the root and sort of what the original, even in NAACP, right? There was white people in the midst. There was racist white people in the midst, and sort of all this other stuff, right? Yeah. And so, we can't trust it. And I was like, "Yep, cool, we can't." Right? Like any institution of governance or whatever, you can't. That's right. However, how, again, for civics to me is about wielding power, the power to protect, empower, and grow your community, right? Yes. So what tools, do I have? I live in New York, where there's 8-1 Democrats to Republican, right? Yes. So the real election battle is not a general election, it's a primary. Mm-hmm. It serves me in my community. It doesn't serve us to have the competition of the parties when we're just simply outnumbered. What is the best vehicle for me to wield power, right, is in this particular place. I say all the time, I have political values that lean more Democratic, that lean more conservative, that lean more libertarian in some issues, right? No one is an embodiment of a political party in this platform 100%. That's true. Right? No, but it is a vehicle, it is a truck that you are using to drive down the road to get you to where you're going. Yes. And I think what's difficult for people to grasp is those kind of concepts, right? But in essence, as I try to tell people, I was like, you make it harder than it is. Yes. Because you operate in that space daily, right? I work at this job that I don't like, that is not my dream. That's right. But I use it to finance my lifestyle and what and what my family needs. I don't like working at the sanitary. Like, I don't like working here. I don't like,
Right.
being in the coal mine. I don't like,
Right.
like working 9 to 5. I don't like this, but I need to do this in
Yes.
order to provide for my family and to maybe finance what I do want to do, whether that's in music, whether that's starting another business, whether that, that's this. So you do that every day already. But
Absolutely.
what people have told you is that doing it with politics is harder.
No.
And they've told you that because they don't want you in the room.
Exactly.
Because the
Exactly.
less people in the room, the less people with power, the more
Mm,
power I can wield.
mm. And there it is. There it is in a nutshell. I mean, yeah, the one thing we have is bodies. We have people. And that's enough if we get enough people. That's right. You want your life to be a little easier. I don't like this job, as you said, but I want to start my own business. Okay, well then it's harder to do without politics. Like you said, you want somebody to make your life a little easier, not to give you everything, but to make it a
Yeah.
little easier for you to be able to do what you need to do, or to break down a barrier that's stopping you. So the way when you explain it like that, it should be very plain and simple to folks, even listening to now. This is number 200 of your classes. And of course, it's going to be hundreds more after this and all the ones that lead up to it. How do we engage in the political process? Because I want. And, it's so funny. Ras Baraka, he was here over Congressional Black Caucus weekend, and we were looking at Why Is We Americans, the documentary that they've done on the Baraka family in Newark. And he said, sometimes it comes down to three simple questions. What do we need? What do we want? And how do we get it? I said, man, that's a beautifully phrased. Now, the we can get complicated in the process, but what do you want? I said, what do you
Yeah.
need? And how can we get it? And that's what you're walking us through Sunday after Sunday. What do we want? What do we need? And how do we get it?
Yeah. I use that frame there. The beginning of every legislative session, sort of after November, between November and January, I bring folks together, in my conference room, because I write the legislative agenda for the state NAACP. And those three questions, it's not put exactly like that, but I'm basically asking the same thing. But instead of this is what do our people need?
Yes.
What are they asking for?
Yes.
And who do we have? Like, what power do we have to make it happen? Right. And I tell people, bring all your stuff, right? You got a report you read, the Joint Center put out something, the thing, like bring it all, bring all the data, bring all the things. Let's look at I bring in Dr. Zalima Blair from Medgar, who does all of census stuff. Like, come on, like,
Yes.
let's all come in a room.
Yes.
What is our agenda? Right. And particularly where in New York, we have the head of the Senate, Black woman, head of the Assembly, Black man. And we have Hochul in a position where we have relationships. I mean, even before, in the previous governor, he and I didn't get along, but he got along with, Hazel Dukes. So I was like,
that?
So Hazel Dukes was the one that this is my, I would be the one at the press conference calling him all kinds of, thing, whatever. And then she would go in the room and I'd be like, this is what you need to ask for. And so people would always be like, how do you work? I was like, it's a beautiful partnership. Both things can be true. He came up with knowing her and having reverence for her and thing whatever, and he can still be a son of a so or as my husband call him, a Dick Tracy villain, right? So like he can still be. Both things can be true, but how do I use the relationship? How do I use the whatever in order to get what we need in order to move things forward? So now if we have a mayor that's, supposedly from our community, a Senate that's from our community, whatever. Okay, what do we need? What do we want? And then how do we make the atmosphere? How do we make the landscape? How do we till the land to make it to make it so? Right? They tell me, oh, this voting rights bill is not our priority at the end of session. Okay. Let me go till the land.
No question. It's gonna be, but I ain't gonna waste my breath with you no more. Let me go over with these people.
Let me go till the land. Now when I come back, I'm like, you see, and they're like, we were near printing, Joy. And I'm like, Sorry, not
Hey,
sorry.
it's my money. My money. Hey, don't worry about that. We pay for. But you also even in how you just laid that out, the many other lessons that you're teaching. One on how to maintain those intergenerational relationships. I know it breaks your heart the way it breaks mine to hear sometimes elders who have
Mm,
fought be kind of dismissed. I know, when I was very young, I remember working on the Jesse Jackson campaign in 84 and 88, just in Nashville, and then in Ohio when I was in grad school. And what that meant to us was huge in terms of inspiration. And of course, down to Brazil and all them come out of that, and Ron Brown. But to hear Jesse Jackson, Al Sharp, slow down. Hazel Dukes is a legend. And instead of you and her beefing, or you say, no, this is like my consigliere. Are you kidding right now? I mean, that's a lesson for young people. Don't throw your old folks away, because those relationships can be golden. And rather than have animosity, it's like, no, look, can you? Oh yeah, I got you. And those are the people who sometimes will fight hardest for you when
yeah.
that kind of, and that to me, that's an example of governance. As you said, who are we to each other? We should never, that intergenerational tie you're mentioning and really kind of illustrating, it isn't just, as you say, bringing young people in. It's also making sure our elders are maintained in a relationship that allows them to continue to wield whatever power that the community has granted to them over the years.
Yeah.
That's very powerful.
So I have this last thing to, I don't know if you're familiar with Regent Lester Young here in New York. So he is like, you talk about an educator.
Yes.
Lester Young, along with Adelaide, comes
Oh, of
from
course.
Adelaide. So he and his wife, Doctors Young, because both he and his wife are doctor in public in education, run the Adelaide Sanford Institute. And so
Mm,
he has a saying, even about education, that can apply to policy overall, is like, everybody likes to address, have race neutral policies to address race based created discrimination
yes.
kind of thing, right? And that's what I thought of. I immediately thought of him, and called him, and he was in a region meeting, when I heard Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, sort of gather, you know, her
Did
receipts together.
yes.
And was just like, okay, so tell me how this is when they deliberately created this in response
My
to the formerly, like the newly free people. Like, so how is that exactly race neutral? Because I went back to the minutes.
How about that? And see, I
The
know you as a
important,
policy man.
important, like, listen, the important minutes. I went back to the report.
And Joy, you've been in those rooms, so when she said she went to the record, you knew exactly what she was talking about. This is how the
Listen,
sausage is made. Y'all playing with the statute. I'm going back to the notes, right? You want to
you
see people to appreciate
originalists,
that.
you
That's
you
right.
originalists
That's
who
right.
like who want to
That's right.
go back.
That's
This
right.
is why, and this is my tip again to Barack Obama, who I've been asking since the beginning of the show. I don't want him to talk about his presidency. I want to talk about the Constitution with Barack Obama. Like, let's talk.
Mm,
Let's have a conversation just about about the Constitution.
come on.
That's my continued as June continue. I think June emails them like every month, look, in order
He
to
gonna
make
write
that
back
happen.
one day. He gonna write
But
back.
the right, but the but to that point of like, I will go back. I will use your method when you say, well, the framers, the original. Okay, let's go back to the frame. Let's go to the framers of the amendment then.
No question. Since y'all want to do that.
Like, if that's what we playing now.
If that's what we playing, yeah, and it was beautiful, wasn't it? I mean, she went straight to the 14th. We had class Wednesday, the Wednesday after she gave that after they had the orals. Um, I had class over at the law school, and we were sitting there. Those young people, they were laughing so hard because, of course, they're law students. They understood exactly. You
Mm-hmm.
almost got to be a lawyer or a law professor or a law student, or as you say, a policymaker or somebody to understand the exquisite nature of what she did. I mean, everybody understands on one level, but as you say,
Mm-hmm.
at that point, you just gonna have to confess. Yeah, I'm a racist. Then I don't really.
Like, you got, like,
Yeah,
I
right.
got nothing.
You got me. Either there's some rules or it ain't no rules. But but you
Like,
speaking.
figure it out.
You figure it out right. And at that point, ain't gonna wear the hat. And I mean, I'm glad that you raised Drs. Young and the Adelaide Sanford Institute, because, of course, Regent Sanford, who paid a heavy price. I mean, who was a pioneer, is a pioneer. I mean, she just released her memoir. We were actually together. She went to Kemet with us. She was in Egypt with us. This is maybe 2007. It was the same year I think Asa Hilliard made transition. We were all there. And, you know, I mean, starting as a school teacher and to give me the worst kids, and I'm gonna make sure it's not a question of intelligence. I can, you know, we can work with them. You haven't broken their spirits. I mean, it really does start with education. Again, bringing it right back to this platform, to this class that you kept going like a metronome. You and June and the whole family. I heard you and June Louis talking in episode in one class. Y'all talking about how you started it just there on your couch and just kept going. I mean, but education becomes the process through which we all want to fight. So we see our people suffering and hurting, but once you get those rules, now I know how to fight. Now I know how we need to be formed up. Now I know how to knock on this door. Now I know how to get community power and then wield my vote and use this civics toolbox. I mean, you know, that is the value. That's the value of this space. And again, I can't thank you enough, Joy. I'm so glad you invited me in to celebrate the 200th with you, because it gave me a chance to say it to your face, you know, on behalf of all of us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a labor of love that even, you know, my whole family, you know, the kids ask me what you talking about, you know, this week, and, you know, and who am I talking to? And I, you know, talk to them about it. And even now we have a 13-year-old who just now permanently gonna live with, you know, with us. And so even, you know, her in that yes, instant teenage mom. I'm like, oh Jesus. Oh Lord. I thought I was gonna do the good.
Just send it to us. You make 5 years, send it to us. We
yeah.
We got
you know, and then, you know, my friends teased me and they were like, and you still got your foster care license open? I'm like, yeah.
Can't help yourself. That's the beauty of it.
You know, and then and you have and then, you know, and it's not like it's me alone. You know, you see my husband with them babies, like you would think, you
would think the truth. Those
right.
are your kids. Those are your kids. No question.
You know, so, you know, yeah. But, you know, I just, to wrap up here, you were using a phrase and you said, Dave, there's this piece for me that's coming out talking about they. You know, what we ascribe today. So, you know, I believe in particularly in the political and policy space of naming who they is. Because particularly people hide behind they. There are some people in the Democratic Party who hide behind they, you know, they won't let me do so-and-so. You know, there are the people that say, you know, they don't let us vote. You know, they don't let it, you know, like we hide behind they. And even elected officials hide behind they. Oh, you know, they, I'm like, who is they? Right? Like, and you'd be surprised that when you ask people that question, some of the most powerful people, and you ask them that question of who is they get and pause. Who is they? They're like, you know, no, I don't know. Who is they stopping you? If you are now in this position of power, who is they that's stopping you from doing what we elected you to do? Who is they that is standing in front of your house, preventing you from and so empowering people to name their devil.
How about that?
Is a lesson in itself.
Empowering people to name their devil.
Because from a political and even economic and civic space, because then and when I do that sort of policy breakdown, it's like, okay, what is the law? What is the policy? Who is the agency? Like, who is preventing this from happening? Right? Is it stuck in policy or whatever? And then who is making the decision, or who, like, getting people to get to the root of that?
Yes.
Is empowering, because sometimes people find out, well, wait, there isn't no they. It's just what I believe.
It's just what I believe. Right. That's right.
So then it's your own block. And even those who are in elected power that come from our community, like, you know, they won't let us do that. How is they? And y'all, there's more of y'all in the city council. Who is they?
Come on. Come on.
Who said,
Right.
or like I asked before, who said you couldn't do it?
Who said you couldn't do it? Mm.
And sometimes it's like, well, this random, the bill writing office said we couldn't do it. I'm like, okay, so write your own bill. Or
Yep.
here's the text of it. Here you go.
Exactly.
Go,
Written like everybody else does. That's right.
right, go file it. Right.
That's right.
But even for us to be able to name the devil, who is stopping, right? And we found when we were able to name some of that, how we were able to break those yokes. Who is they that is locking all our people? Oh, district attorneys and their wide discretion on how they can charge people or not charge people. And what have we seen in the past 10 years? DAs, because we were able to name who they were, now we can elect or we can change who they are and put people in there to make decisions that are in our best interest. What happens when you name the devil is that here come the light.
Here come the light.
Right? And it shines on them, and then you're like, oh. Are you going to respond to it, or do we got to move you?
Right. Because the they is getting real smaller, but we're beginning to get some names now, and we can see some relationship. That's right. That's so powerful by naming it. I love what you said, exposing people and exposing people and empowering people to name their devil, empowering people to name their devil. And then you realize, okay, I thought it was like all these devils, and it was really just like 3. And we can take them
and we can
move them out there. Right. Right. But the first thing was, I didn't know. That's amazing. I mean, I say amazing only in the sense of it really, let me ask, it probably floors people to realize how much of that is in their heads, huh? And not outside.
Yes. But then it also embarrasses people.
Oh, I'm sure.
And what happens sometimes when people caught up in ego are embarrassed?
Oh, of course. Of course. And probably a little afraid too, because now people realize that you didn't even, are you scared? Don't be scared.
But then that goes back to us as in terms of using our tools of like being able to give people the backup. So then once you expose people,
that's right,
and you name it, and you want them to go fight, now you got to be behind them with the gun though. You got to be behind them with the spear though. You got to show up. You got to be on time.
That's right.
Because you can't send somebody to fight the war on your behalf. You got to be ready to suit up.
That's another jewel. You brought it all the way back to where we started. That responsibility. It's on all of us. Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, you got me. Now what? Well, no, now you got to get their back. That's right. Or find somebody who, if you got to move them, you got to put somebody in there. But you're right. It comes back to us. There's no place to hide for anybody. I love that. Responsibility. Yes, we got to back them up.
And that's where, in starting from those beginnings, notice how, and this is what I do, and this is what I hope that people get out of Sunday Civics overall, is I don't start with, and I have a whole episode on the voter blame game, right? You never start with, you ain't voting, you ain't doing, you ain't,
Come on now. Teach.
You never start there.
Yes.
You start local. You start with relationship. You start with the issues that matter. You start there. So by the time you've empowered people with the information, then you help them to realize what tools and resources they have access to, where they can go get, how to use those tools.
Yes.
Right? Then you teach them how to hold others accountable, how to name their devil, how to do all of that. By that time, the ask then to be like, oh, and will you vote on it? Oh, no question. Because if you start with the other thing, that's how you get apathy. That's how you get, I don't want to know that voting stuff. Because it's not relevant to me. But you can't start there.
Yes. No, that's it. The stage is right. At that point, you don't have to ask them to vote. They're going to, when is the vote now? With the election, I got this date right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
My registration is updated, right? I'm good. Okay. Yeah, That is, see, that's the lesson. But see, that's the hard work. It's not sexy. It's not instant. You know what I'm saying? It's not a tweet. You know what I'm saying? It's not a sound bite. That's that hard work. You gotta love the people that do that kind of work.
Oh, you gotta love Black people. It's hard,
No question.
hard loving Black people.
Hard loving. It breaks your heart, but only because we love them.
I was like, I have my girlfriend, we call each other, and that's how we start the conversation when we about to tell the story of what Black people done to you today. So be like, "Woo, girl, I love Black people." And she'd be like, "Woo, Lord, what happened?"
What happened? Right, exactly. Lord, yes. That's the truth. That's the truth. I am loving this. Well, I mean, and
oh my gosh,
people don't. I think people maybe wouldn't know that this type of work, while it can be taxing, and certainly, all love to you and your husband and the continually growing family, because there's a sacrifice families make as well. In the middle of all that, the replenishment comes in those moments when you realize that this work is not in vain. And the people will let you know that. Like you said, whether it be those brothers when you was younger going out to do the thing in another state, and they're like, "Oh, wait, where you going, sis? We would have called it." Or your daughter coming in
for this early.
Or your daughter coming in and talking to Chuck Schumer in a way that models what's going to happen when she becomes the senator from New York. I mean, all those moments is like, yeah, this is why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
This is why.
Well, Dr. Carr, thank you.
No.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
For being, and yes, we have to do the book one.
No question.
Because
yes. We talked.
You got to do it because I have my younger cousins come up. I have some younger cousins, male cousins, and that's a whole nother show. We'll talk about what's happening.
Yes.
With the 20 to 45 young Black male situation.
Yeah.
But I have them that are on the conservative sort of economic sort of thing, and so they come to my house, and and they say it's my fault, and the reason they say it's my fault is because in my college Black Power awakening, I brought them to campus. I brought these are the same cousins I used to carry on my hip, that they were whatever they were young, whatever. So I brought them to campus. I exposed them, but then I went off and continued my education, but left them at Black Power without,
They
so they like come, yeah, they put it on me. So they come to my house because they be like, they do videos from my house now. They talk about, my cousin got the, the first edition, whatever. I'm like, are you fronting at my house? Are you really doing YouTube videos with your your people from my house?
I ain't mad. But you had to read these books now though, because remember
I was like, they was like, because the book, my politics is Booker T. Washington, not the thing. And I'm like, what is happening?
I love it. So these are like, some of them are like your cousins, but they really kind of like auntie to them in terms of age. So that's all right. They at least they're in the library, and
right. Where and they they came over my house to eat, and next thing I come from the kitchen, and they in there doing TikTok videos with I was like, but you don't even own this book. You didn't even read it.
We said you didn't even read it. TikTok can't tell the difference. So it's somebody somewhere reading that book because they made that TikTok video
in front of my library.
It's out there. That's a whole nother universe. I ain't got nothing on TikTok. But it's somebody somewhere in the world reading some of them books, some of your books they held up because they made that TikTok. So you doing good in the world and didn't.
They be fronting, Dr. Carr, and I'm just like, what is happening?
That's all right. It's better than holding up something else. That's monopoly money, or you never know. That's the genius of our people. Something like that could spark off. You'll never know. Just know that it's happening. You teaching even in that moment.
Oh boy.
Well,
thank you so much. And I'll be back in class. I'll be back in class myself in Nubia.
Me too. And I'm in class all over the world with you. And like I said, the podcast is easier for me because I can just go boom, boom, boom. But serious. I mean, we are fortunate to have you. And to do 200 like this, we both know how hard it is to maintain that type of schedule on top of everything else we're doing. So on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you and congratulate you and June, the whole crew, which I know is like a nation of people, not just that. and you know, hundreds and hundreds more, because this is the work that will help us get free. And there's no amount of value that we could place on that. This is the most valuable thing. So thank you, not just for this, but for your continuing work in life of modeling what it looks like to be a liberation warrior. So thank you.
Thank you.